The college basketball season just ended, and it's time for football to take back center stage with the United Football League. After 2 straight weeks of profit, come join in on the UFL Week 3 game breakdowns and best bets. Welcome, football fans, to another edition of IDP Plus Bets. What is up, folks? I'm your host, the DGen Doc, and that is right. We're in UFL Week 3, 2 weeks of football, and we are finding our groove, just like some of these teams. Some are finding their groove, and some of them are finding them sliding slowly. Some cases rapidly down the power rankings, down the standings, down to be the bottom of this league here. So we're 2 weeks in and teams are starting to show themselves, and we're starting to get an idea of which teams are really these contenders and which teams are these pretenders. I mean, week 2, another fun week in the UFL. Had a bunch of big spreads going into the week and had some close games. 3 close-ish games. Definitely 2 of them that went somewhat down to the wire, and then the last game of the weekend was a little bit out of hand. That Stallions Michigan game wasn't out of reach, but it was kind of always going to be the Birmingham Stallions game to kind of win there. So, look, coming off week 2, it was a little bit up and down. Now, let's go ahead and we'll just go right back into the kind of takeaways and what we're doing here. And so, easiest way to do this is to just tally it up. And as a reminder, so this video comes out on Wednesdays, recorded Tuesday night. So this is sides and total bets. So because that's kind of what we have. On X on Fridays, I will post the official player props. I talked about this last episode. Another reason, go ahead, give me a follow at the DGen Doc on X. Just kind of quickly show through how we've been doing so far. Not as great on the sides and totals this week. First week, 5-1 sides and totals. Didn't get the player props out because everything's new and figuring out which books offer it. Over for the player props, I will say ESPN Bet seems to be the leader in this category as far as which book's going to offer the most props and the best numbers here. So put a card out on Friday over on the X. Player props really went off. I think it was a 7-2 record there on the player props, which helps. Only going 2-4 on the sides and the totals there. So that player props really kind of led the way there. Overall for the week, the record was 9-7, but we did hit a nice plus 850. Jacob Harris, most receiving yards, a guy who I've talked about kind of taking over that San Antonio Brahmas wide receiver 1 role. That definitely did help. Nice 10 plus units of profit. Coming off a nice profitable week 1, we are up 17.33 units if you played them kind of how I advised, with all the bets so far. So not too much time we're going to spend on the rear view, but just kind of want to reiterate, hey, so this video is going to be sides and it's going to be totals just because that's what the information we have out now. Want to make sure we get it out before a lot of people start betting it because that's where we get the best of the numbers. And then really for the player props, mostly from availability, you're not going to have that much just like from until Friday because it seems like they're waiting for the depth charts to drop, which honestly can't say I blame the books because in this league, the depth charts could change. You really never know who's going to be getting the start and things like that. So definitely, if you're just a sides and total person, this is the place for you. If you want to also get in on the player props, follow me on X at the DGen Doc. Again, really nice week on the player props to help make up for not so great on the sides and totals there. All right. Without further ado, let's go ahead and start looking forward to week 3. And best way to go ahead and kick this off as we get into week 3. Here is my updated power rankings here. Coming in week 3. And at the very top, it stayed the same with the St. Louis Battlehawks. But we've got a bit of a shakeup of just about everywhere else. So I actually have the Birmingham Stallions, despite losing to the DC Defenders in week 1. I think they were able to find themselves a little bit. We'll talk about it in a second. But Alex Magoo went down first play of the game with a shoulder injury, did not return. Matt Corral came in and really kind of ignited that offense. Throws a very pretty deep ball. I'll talk about some of the areas where I think he's a little bit limited. But definitely that offense, put up some points and looked much, much more efficient with him at the helm. Arlington 2-0, but I'm not quite there yet with Arlington. I still think they've got some questions to be answered. This Michigan Panthers team, this is a little bit, maybe 4-5 definitely could be adjusted here due to some news that we're going to get to in a second. But if they get Bryce Perkins on the field, I like this Michigan Panthers team. When they mess around with that Danny Etling nonsense, that's not where I'm a fan of this Michigan Panthers team. DC defenders, really good on defense. I still got some questions on their offense. Memphis, I think, clearly the best team of the 0-2s. Houston, a little bit up, not in the dungeon, because that is for the San Antonio Brahmas, who have been an absolute disgrace this year. San Antonio Brahmas, they were the XFL conference champions. They were the runner-up. They, really, the championship game, it was a little bit of a blowout, but still, they were one game away from winning it all last season. They brought back a ton of talent, a ton of that roster, and they said they upgraded the quarterback room in Kellen Mond. So high expectations for this team. Absolute disaster in every facet of the word. Mond looks terrible. The coaching staff, the decision making, the personnel. Anthony McFarland was one of the best players in the league last year. They won't give him touches. Every time he touches the ball, something exciting, something explosive happens. The team just won't give him the touches. It's about as frustrating as the Bryce Perkins, not getting on the field. I think we're getting a little bit too much of some UFL big brain kind of coaching right now. Play your best players. It's not that hard. So that's how I see it coming into the week. Obviously, that's going to kind of affect how I'm seeing these games as we go to these game breakdowns. I do want to talk about some bigger kind of trades, injury, transaction news, just because we got a couple that, as we're getting into these weeks that we didn't have a lot these first 2 weeks, so I didn't spend a lot of time on it. But some things to note. Starting with the Birmingham Stallions, they picked up pass rusher Delonte Scott, who was a former a former San Antonio Brahma. He was a edge rusher then for the Brahmas. That was a Brahmas unit that had a bunch of guys, but Delonte Scott was one of the leaders in sacks and pressure for them. So I really like that pickup for Birmingham. I don't know why he's not on the roster right now. He's a solid player, so I like that pickup there. And then Michigan's really kind of in the news, not really for the best reasons. One, all USFL player, all UFL player last season, defensive player, Breland Speaks, led the league in sacks, absolute monster in the defensive line. He's on the IR. He got put on the IR with an injury. He's going to be out at least several weeks, potentially the entire season. And then the other big news, Michigan Panthers traded one of their best wide receivers in Marcus Sims to the Houston Texans for their starting right tackle, Cam Carter. Michigan, I'm a bit confused here. Why you're sending away arguably your best wide receiver? I know they want to kind of fix the offensive line. I don't know if really Marcus Sims is the asset that you want to trade away. And then Houston, their wide receiver room wasn't terrible. I don't think that's the worst part of their team. I think it's quarterback and the protection. And to take away a key starter on your offensive line is a bit puzzling. So really, I'm not sure either team got better from this trade. So this is one that we're going to want to monitor and see how it plays out. But definitely going to shake some things up. Definitely the player prop. And with Michigan losing Breland Speaks, he's going to, downgrade them a little bit there because he is such a good player. All right. So let's go ahead and get into week 3. We've got a nice slate. We've got some competitive matchups. Hopefully we get a lot of close games here because I think we've got really on paper some games that could really be exciting and start to shape. There's only 10 weeks in this league, right? So week 3, it's still early, but start thinking about standings, start thinking about where 2 out of the 4 teams in each conference make the playoff. We can start seeing some matchups here. So I really am excited for this UFL week 3, and hopefully we continue to profit, man. We've been doing pretty well. But before we do that, before we jump in, let's go ahead and tell you about some of our sponsors and partners here. One of the new ones it looks like we're bringing on here, Fast Draft. That's right. It's an app called Fast Draft. They've got off-season best ball that we're going to be firing on. It's a fantasy projection site that we're going to be partnering with here. So want to get that bug in your ear to start getting ready. Download Fast Draft, over in the App Store. Very easy process to sign up. I just did it myself this week. And we're going to be running some contests. We're going to be doing some content there. So you're going to want to make sure you get plugged in. That is Fast Draft app. Don't worry. That will be in the show notes, the description there. Also, make sure you head on over to idpplus.com. We've got memberships. We've got articles. We've got everything you want. One of the only sites talking football, 24/7, 365. Look, NFL offseason. We got the NFL draft coming up. You want to know college basketball just ended. No one wants to pretend they're caring about baseball or NBA or anything like that. You want football content. That's why you're here. Head on over to idpplus.com. And also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on the notifications for the Bets channel, for the IDP Plus YouTube channel. Again, we're going to be providing content for you all off season long, all the way up to week 1 of the NFL season. And then finally, best part of the offseason, Fantasy Football Expo. That's right. Head over to the fantasyfootballexpo.com to get your tickets today. All right. Let's get into the games here. And we are starting with our Friday night game with the Arlington Renegades heading over to the Birmingham Stallions. Arlington coming in at 2-0, Birmingham at 1-1 here. Both these teams last week a little bit opposite. Arlington came out, looked great in week 1, put up 33 points against what was supposed to be a good San Antonio defense. And then they played Houston last week, only won by 2, 11-9. A very lackluster performance by their offense. And some of the problems for Arlington last season, penalties, not being able to convert on 3rd and 4th down, lack of a little bit of a run game consistently. They started to rear their ugly head a little bit in this game against Houston, which is a much inferior opponent than they're about to face this week. And then Birmingham was the opposite. They kind of came out and looked like shit in the first game against DC, only putting up 11 points, not being able to throw the ball. And they came out and they played a pretty solid Michigan Panthers team. And Matt Corral came in and really lit them up through the air. Matt Corral, again, he threw 2 interceptions. He really should have had 3. He almost threw a pick 6. So I've talked about Matt Corral last year. There was a reason why he got benched. He does bring that variability, but man, does he throw a pretty deep ball. Indeed, he did, to his credit, have that offense humming pretty well, putting up 21 points on Michigan Panthers defense that I think is one of the better ones in the league. So 2 teams that, week 1, they had opposite performances. Arlington looked great. Birmingham looked bad. And then week 2, they kind of flip-flop. Birmingham looks good. Arlington, not very impressive. So now we have Arlington heading to Birmingham. Arlington's first time on the road this season. We've got Arlington catching 3 on the road at plus 135 on the money line. And then we have the Birmingham Stallions. They are laying 3 at home, minus 160 on the money line. Over under sitting at 39.5. All right. Way I'm playing this one, give me the Birmingham Stallions. Skip Holtz, one of the best coaches, if not the best coach of the modern spring football league era. He made adjustments, and he made it work even with the backup quarterback. Now, it does look like, based on the injury reports, that Alex Magoo has not practiced the first 2 practices, in this week. Unlikely he's going to be able to play. He's banged up in the shoulder, but they've got Matt Corral, who showed that he can be capable. And they also have Case Cookus, who I'm pretty damn high on Case Cookus. So if they need, they've also got that as a backup option as well. The only a little bit of concern here, Deion Kane is not missed. He's missed the first 2 practices with a personal reason. Never know, could be a pregnancy, could be a family emergency. Never really know that situation. Really haven't been able to get much out of that. Hopefully he plays. Obviously, he's a big part. He had a huge game last week, 4 receptions, 84 yards, and a touchdown. He's one of Matt Corral's favorite targets. So you do want to monitor that situation there. But I just think this situation where they are getting CJ Marable back in the backfield, they kind of found themselves a little bit, right? They went back to Old Reliable. They went back to Kane, to Sternberger. They went back to running the football, and the defense played well. And I liked for them to be at home, first game at home, and I like for them to defend home field. Look, they're the back-to-back defending spring football champions for a reason. I like them to right the ship. And this is a little bit of a fate of Arlington. Arlington, despite being 2-0, let's be honest, they've played the worst 2 teams in the league. That first week, and the reason why I was on Arlington last week, I was like, okay, they just made San Antonio, the UFL runner-up, look terrible. They really handled them. And now we have a situation where you look at San Antonio, and San Antonio, they have a negative 41 point differential, the worst in the league. They're really bad. The team right behind them is Houston. They're about like negative 30-ish points point differential as well. So they play the 2 worst teams in the league. And last week they didn't really look very good against an offense that can't move the ball worth a damn. So, I I think that the penalties are going to be, something huge here in a tight contest. I think Arlington's going to have more penalties and they're going to make more mistakes. And I'm not quite bought in on this defense that looks improved. But again, they've played Houston and they've played San Antonio, two of the worst offenses right now in the league. So give me Birmingham -3 at home. And then give me the over in this one. I talked about, uh, Arlington looks like they're coming in fairly healthy based on the injury reports. We talked about Magoo, questionable. We'll see. Hopefully, Deion Kane can get on the field there. But the Birmingham Stallions have some questions in the back end. They've got some injuries to the safety and cornerback position. I think they're a good unit. I don't think they're a dominant unit this year. And then Arlington, their pass offense is going to be able to go with Luis Perez. Kind of trust him there. And then with Birmingham, I talked about Matt Corral being a little bit of high variance. I think that one, he throws a super, super pretty deep ball. They definitely take a lot more shots with him than they did with Magoo. Look for Deion Kane. Look for Jordan Thomas, the big wide receiver. They'd like to throw him at least 2 or 3 deep shots down the field. So I like the over in this game because I think both passing offenses can have some success there. Last time these two teams plays, it was 27-14. I could see a similar score than that. Maybe both teams get into the 20s there, 27-21, something like that. But I do like Birmingham at home, and I like both these offenses. So give me Birmingham laying the 3 and the over 39.5. All right, moving on to the next game on Saturday at 2:30 Eastern time, and that last game was Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. But for Saturday, we've got a battle of what used to be the garbage in the league. Still not great, but maybe they're a step above San Antonio in my eyes at least. But Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern time, Memphis, Tennessee. We've got the 0-2 Houston Roughnecks taking on the 0-2 Memphis Showboats. I think this is going to be actually a pretty entertaining game. I mean, these teams, despite not being great, and that is Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Apologize there, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, not at noon Eastern time in Memphis, Tennessee. You got the Houston Roughnecks catching 3 points on the road there, plus 130 on the money line. And then Showboats laying 3 at home, minus 155 on the money line. Over-under sit at 36.5. So we have two teams here where, yes, they're both 0-2, but in my mind, one team is much, much improved and looks like a much higher quality of team than the other. And really, for me, it's the Memphis Showboats. I think Ken Whisenhunt coming back, and he was the head coach. He was the offense coordinator. He took that kind of very sudden leave of absence for a week last week in week 1. I think they looked much more organized. They put up 300 plus total yards of offense against a DC Defenders team that really kind of handled and shut down the Birmingham Stallions offense. So that game was tightly contested. They played DC. I think it was a 17-12 finish at DC on the road. They were in that game. They took the lead late in the fourth quarter. They missed a field goal at the end to kind of blow any of their chances that they had at that game. But Memphis played much, much better than they did in week 1. And even in week 1, despite losing by double digits, that was the last second pick 6. So they've been in both those games there. Where Houston, on the other hand, the first week they got blown out by St. Louis. Last week, they hung around with Arlington. It was really a sloppy game. More so than I think Houston, playing super well. I think it was just a sloppy game overall. And that offense is just awful. Outside of one drive all day, they didn't do a damn thing. They had one drive where kind of Anthony Brown let them down and with some big time throws and things there a little bit late to kind of get the cover there. But their offense is just incredibly bad. CJ Johnson, the coach there, no one knows what's going on. There seems to be no game plan. You don't know exactly who's the quarterback's going to be. They don't have a run game. So they're putting a lot on the shoulders of two quarterbacks who have not shown the ability to handle a lot. So, their quarterbacks, both Brown and Nolan Henderson, respectively, each week have led the team in rushing. So they have no running game. The offense is very predictable, and the quarterbacks just frankly aren't a very good quarterback room. So I like EJ Perry stepped in last week and really kind of took the reins of the QB1 role. Perry's a guy who did start for Michigan last year. He is a guy who can be a viable starter. And then, let's get to the picks and then we'll talk about it here. But obviously, you could probably tell where I'm going with this. Memphis -3. Love Memphis this week. I think they're a much better 0-2 team compared to the Houston Roughnecks. I don't think these two teams are on the same level. I talked about EJ Perry kind of stabilizing that quarterback room. They had 300 plus total yards. They've been more consistent. I think one more week with Ken Wisenhunt being with the team, that continuity, I think that's important. Defense has been improved. And then Jonathan Adams is just a stud wide receiver. Maybe the best wide receiver in the league. I mean, he's leading the league in receiving yards by almost 100 yards. One to watch, in the first practice this week, EJ Perry was limited with a flank injury, which just kind of relates to like the buttock area. But he was limited, so I do expect him to play there. And then the Houston side again, this offense is just so bad. They're a bit beat up on the injury report. They got multiple starters, who are banged up. Again, it's early in the week. That was their first practice, so a little bit hard to tell at this point, but still, healthy or not, I cannot back this Houston team right now. They'll be on the road here, and Memphis has their number. 2 times they played last year, Memphis 18, Houston 12, and then Houston 12, Memphis 19. So, this is 2 teams that don't score a lot of points, so I'm going to be on the under 36.5 here. Last time both these games went under, they were ending at 30 and 31 points respectively. Both these teams have struggled to score this year. Houston's put up 6 points and 9 points, and then Memphis put up 12 last week and this week. So not too prolific offenses, right? I do expect Memphis to control the game, but give me like a 21-10 game. Give me something around there. Maybe even, obviously probably not 21, right? We're going to get some funky score, like maybe 18-6, 18-9, something in that realm is what I'm thinking there, with Memphis being able to handle the Houston Roughnecks. All right, moving on to the final day, Sunday, where we got our last 2 games of the slate here. We've got, 2 teams that were in the playoffs last season there. The San Antonio Brahmas heading to the Michigan Panthers. San Antonio Brahmas 0-2, Michigan Panthers 1-1 there. This is Sunday at noon Eastern time in Detroit, Michigan at Ford Field. The Brahmas catching 4.5 points on the road. You've got Michigan Panthers laying 4.5 at home. Brahmas plus 170 on the money line, and the Panthers minus 205. Over under sitting at 36.5 points here. My biggest takeaway as like a big picture league view for the first 2 weeks of the UFL, the San Antonio Brahmas absolutely suck. It's a disgrace what is going on in San Antonio right now. This is a team, again, that was 1 game away. They were in the championship game last year. They had best defense in the league. They had electric players in John Trey Kirkland, Anthony McFarland. They looked great, and they brought back a bunch of that roster. And I have no idea what's going on with this coaching staff, but they do not have these guys looking right at all. Kellen Mond does not look like the answer. He looks like he's lost. There's no motion. There's no creativity. And you're like taking your best players off the field. Anthony McFarland is getting less than 10 touches a game, and he's averaging over 5 yards a touch. I mean, it just does not make any sense. This defense is not the same. They're scrappy. They've got some guys, but they cannot stop the run, which Michigan Panthers are going to want to lean on. I right now, I don't know how San Antonio, with the way they're operating, does much of anything, both offense and defense. The only thing I'll say about San Antonio, Jacob Harris, former, a big wide receiver, former UCF wide receiver. He's a stud. Him and Kellen Mond seem to have a good connection. I've been on his player prop. Really, it took it both weeks, but gave it out last week. Gave him to lead the game at plus 850. Helped us cash there. He has been a consistent guy for them. Outside of that, no consistency whatsoever on offense. Michigan Panthers, again, it's not that hard, Mike Nolan. Just let Bryce Perkins play the entire game. Just keep your best player on the field. Special teams was an issue for them. They didn't look great last week, and it seems like Birmingham Stallions are their kryptonite. They're 0-6 against them, but they're pretty solid against the rest of the league there. We'll have to see. Again, no Brilliant Spears. I know Matt Colburn did pick up an injury late, but haven't heard much about him. And no Marcus Sims anymore. Now, I think that Cam Carter comes in and helps to bolster this offensive line a little bit. I just think against the Brahmas, they're not going to need to put up a ton of points. I think this is going to be an ugly like 12-3 game, maybe a 12-6 game, something like that. You know, I do think if Bryce Perkins is on the field, he's the best player by far for both these teams. So I think that, that is a clear quarterback advantage for Michigan if, they just keep him on the damn field. Michigan, with the loss of Breland Speaks and Marcus Sims, I think overall, big picture, might be a little bit on the downturn for me. But in this game in particular, give me the Michigan Panthers at home, -4.5 there. I just simply cannot take the San Antonio Brahmas. They look a mess. Kellen Mond looks like he has no idea what's going on. They're not putting their best players on the field. They're committing egregious penalties. The coaches' challenges are a mess. Everything right now, top to bottom, the 2 games of football that San Antonio Brahmas have played, absolute disgrace. They have the worst point differential in the league they've been less than 41 points in their opponents in this 2 games combined. Quite frankly, it is criminally, it's almost a crime what this coaching staff is doing with this roster. But I can't back them to figure it out. So give me Michigan -4.5. All right, last game rather. We're going to DC Defenders are heading to St. Louis in the Battle Dome, best home environment in spring football, to take on the St. Louis Battlehawks. A battle of 2-0 teams ending out the slate at 3 p.m. Sunday Eastern Time. Again, this is St. Louis, Missouri, in that Battle Dome there. DC Defenders, despite 2-0, catching a bigger number here, +5.5, +210 on the money line. Battlehawks -5.5 and -260. When these 2 teams played last year, St. Louis won both times, by a score of 45-12, and then 21-26. Right now, St. Louis Battlehawks, again, kind of, what competition have they played, playing Houston and San Antonio, but they just look like the most complete team. They're dominating bad teams, the 2 teams they've played. We'll see how they go against good teams, but they look complete. Offense is humming, scoring the most points in the league. Defense flying around, making plays, has good pass rush, good linebackers, good secondary. Like, there's not a lot of holes in this roster. The big question mark was Manny Wilkins, taking over for AJ McCarron. What's that quarterback position going to look like? He looks awesome. He's getting rid of the ball on time. They're not leaning on him so much. They're not making him throw 30, 40 times a game. He's using his legs. They're using Jacob Sailors as a workhorse. And that was without Hakeem Butler last week, who had a little bit of a hamstring injury. So this team is fun to watch. Balanced attack. They had 164 on the ground, 155 through the air. They've got an awesome offensive line that pushes people around. And I think, DC Defenders do have a solid defense that can blitz a lot. But I think the ability of St. Louis to keep them off balance with the, weapons that they have, I think it's going to be a huge factor here. DC, I still have major question marks on their offense. I think their defense is absolutely improved. But Jordan Ta'amu, less than 50% completion percentage last week. They did run the ball a ton, 32 rush attempts, which I think is a good idea for DC. Chris Rowland, doing a nice role there with Ty Scott still being their wide receiver 1. In this one though, I'm gonna go with the Battlehawks. Give me St. Louis. I can't fade this team right now. They look incredibly good. Both the games they've played, they've really just beat the crap out of their opponents and just imposed their will. DC, they beat the Stallions. I think that was a little bit about the Stallions just kind of getting caught off guard, thinking they were going to coast kind of into the season, coast to the championship, and DC kind of punched them in the mouth. And they came out and they looked pretty lackluster against Memphis there. Now they hit the road for the first time. I think, again, this is an actual home field environment. I think the ability of Manny Wilkins to not only use his arm, but to use his legs, Jacob Sailors, Hakeem Butler, Ja'Cour Pearson. This is going to be a big test for this DC Defenders defense, who's looked really good so far, but they have not been tested to this level. And then I really think that the Battlehawks defense is going to give the DC Defenders fits. I think Tiamu's going to get into trouble, have a couple turnovers here, and I think that's going to be, the difference in the game. I think that this is going to be a situation where Battlehawks win by, 8 to 10 points there, and then they just kind of control the game with the home environment. I don't think DC is, again, 2-0, off to a good start. I'm not fully bought in on this team. got major questions on their offense, and I think it kind of shows up here. So give me St. Louis minus 5.5. All right. Very, very chalky week for me. Taking all the favorites there. But let's get to the point where giving out my best bets for UFL week 3. And starting us off, give me the Arlington and Birmingham over 39.5 points there. Again, two of the better offenses in the league. I am not quite sold on this Arlington defense just yet. They haven't really played anyone, playing Houston, playing San Antonio, the two worst offenses in the league. So I think with Matt Corral, Birmingham offense is going to move the ball a bit better. I also think he's good for one or two kind of turnovers there. Almost threw a pick 6 last week. So I just think that, I'm not going to go as far to say he's on Jameis Winston level, but he's not afraid to let it rip, for better or for worse. And I think that's a great situation for the over. And then you got Luis Perez to lean on in the passing attack. So I like both passing attacks in that one. And then give me the Memphis Showboats. I love Memphis this week. -3 at home, taking on the Houston Roughnecks. Despite both teams being 0-2, I told you, I think this Memphis Showboats team actually can be a solid team. I think Ken Wisenhunt's a good coach. Again, 300 total yards. If they could just cut down on the turnovers last week, I think they could have beat DC outright. They've got one of the best wide receivers in the league in Jonathan Adams. Nobody on Houston can cover that. Houston, although picking up a wide receiver, Marcus Sims, they just lost their right tackle. I don't like Houston to be able to figure it out on offensive line. So give me Memphis -3 at home. And then my D-Gen play of the week, Houston-Memphis under 31.5 at +162. Last two times these teams played last season, the total ended at 30 and 31. Both these offenses do struggle to put up points. As much as I like Memphis, I can see them scoring, maybe 15, 18. And then, Houston hasn't made it out of the single digits yet this season. So I like this to be a low-scoring affair, although I like Memphis to kind of dominate there. So those are my best bets for UFL Week 3. All right, folks, as a reminder, the videos, sides and totals, game breakdowns, things like that, I want to get it out as quick as possible so we can get the best of the number here. And then Friday over on X at the DGen Doc, I'll be posting my plays. Again, you're going to want to make sure you get over there and get those because sometimes the size and totals, like week 1s, we go 5-1, have a great week there. Sometimes it's like last week, not great on the size and totals, but 7-2 on the props, including a +850 there. So you're going to want to make sure you're getting everything to continue to profit with us here at IDP Plus Bets. All right, folks, that is it. I'm very excited for this week. I think we're going to learn a lot about these teams. And I really think, especially those first two days here, that Friday and Saturday games are going to be really nice competitive matchups there. We'll see if the Brahmas get up off the mat. And then that night, the final, call it a nightcap, 3 p.m. on a Sunday. DC Defenders, St. Louis Battlehawks, 2-2-0 teams. I'm ready to see if DC is the real test. I think that the Battlehawks are going to take it to them, but this is a great opportunity for DC to cement themselves as a true contender in this league. All right, folks, from myself, the DGen Doc at IDP Plus Bets. Hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, do all those great things. Let's continue to profit and cash off this UFL season. And without further ado, I am out of here.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.